You're listening to Honestly Mental, the podcast, and I'm your host, Erika Diaz. I'm a wife, a mama, a woman in leadership, but y'all, I'm a perfectly imperfect human. I have depression, PTSD, and generalized anxiety disorder, and I am figuring it out every single day. It's really been quite the journey, so this podcast aims to provide a raw and authentic approach to several issues surrounding mental health. Through the lens of our guests and I, we will provide insight into how we navigated our own challenges through honest and vulnerable conversation. We are building a community of individuals committed to changing the world one conversation, one person at a time. We are raising awareness by destigmatizing mental health through continuing the conversation. We are providing hope and ultimately have a goal of saving the lives of those who may be feeling dark and alone. Hello, and thank you for joining Honestly Mental, the podcast. We are back after a bit of a hiatus, and I'm so excited to bring back a familiar face. We've got Ashley Andersen joining us, and Ashley has just recently launched a new company. So she is now the founder of Ezra Sage, a business dedicated to helping companies increase motivation, commitment, and retention by giving leaders the skills and support necessary to drive achievement without compromising well-being. Drawing on her extensive background in executive coaching and leadership development, Ashley is deeply committed to and skilled in equipping organizations with the tools to reduce toxic stress and burnout, creating environments where people are not just productive, but truly thrive. Thank you for joining us again, Ashley.
I am delighted to be back.
Yeah, so when we first had our original episode, we talked about emotional literacy in the workplace and really some of the pitfalls that can happen by not letting emotions in. And I think what we want to do today is almost part two of that. So, a bit of a deeper dive into how to effectively navigate conversations around emotions as a leader. And, I think I want to highlight just a common myth that we talked about previously, and that is whose responsibility it is in the workplace to handle emotions or deal with emotions, manage emotions, not solve all the problems related to emotions, but a lot of people feel like it's HR's responsibility, and that is just really not the case, especially in people leadership roles. There's the human component to coming to work every day and showing up as your true authentic self. And so because of that, leaders have a responsibility in being able to have effective conversations around emotions and learning how to navigate surfacing those conversations regarding emotions, right? Because it's a situation where, we talked about being curious about emotions and really as a leader, being curious about emotions and doing it in a genuine manner, it really puts you in a position to kind of figure out where an employee really is at. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on. I think when people hear emotions, they get a little bit worried. And I know this from conversations with leaders on this specific topic where there's concern about, quote unquote, opening the floodgates or I've heard sort of rebuttals of, I'm not people's therapist. And so I would encourage leaders, especially to not go to that extreme, when we're talking about being a leader who is equipped and capable and who is actively checking in on people and being able to have conversations that do involve emotions and sometimes difficult emotions, that we're not saying you need to be a therapist, and we're not at all saying you need to do a deep dive into this person's sort of psychological history. That's absolutely not what we're talking about. We're talking about being equipped in that way, but also having boundaries. Boundaries are always a big part of this work. And that's why it is work, to try to figure out, okay, where is the line where it is my responsibility. It's also a huge opportunity as a leader to really, we talk about, you heard in my bio about things like productivity and motivation, and those are all things that leaders can totally get behind, that they want to see more of out of their teams and their workforce. But you can't get those, you can't really reap the maximum amount of benefits of productivity and motivation without leading the whole person, all of who they are. And that requires that skill in leaders to be able to have conversations that are vulnerable, that are more human, and aren't just about people's tasks and their projects.
Yeah, and the fact remains too that most humans don't actually like talking about emotions. So
True.
it's not even just leaders who may or may not be equipped to have conversations that involve emotions, but it's really everyone. I know that sometimes just bringing up the topic of emotions in certain circles can make people squirm. And so I would say, for those listening, you're not alone at all. Again, in a leadership role or not. And I would encourage people in the workplace to consider this episode as an opportunity to expand their skills, even if they're not a people leader, because I think that, you're interacting with one another and other human beings day in and day out. And so just coming with genuine curiosity around where someone is truly at, I think allows the other person to feel seen and heard in a way that they wouldn't if you weren't allowing them to show up with whatever emotion it is, within reason, because you mentioned boundaries, and and have conversation.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's that study that talks about, like, quote unquote friends at work, and how important it is to have those relationships. That, to me, like a friendship at work is a relationship that extends, again, beyond just like the tasks and the projects and the technical aspects of our roles. And that doesn't have to just be in the leader direct report relationship. Like, we are impacting people every time we're interacting with them, regardless of the position that we hold and kind of the reporting structure of that relationship or lack thereof. So it's really a personal decision when it comes to skilling yourself up in this way. Like, do I want to be the type of person who comes to the relationship and exactly what you said, Erika, like, is able to provide that experience for the other person where they feel seen and heard and understood and valued? Or do I not want to provide that? Do I want to potentially like squash that? And we live in a world where we're extremely connected in some ways. We have our computers in our pockets and we're on every app and whatnot. So we're able to like reach out to one another, but we're not connected in those deep, genuine ways where we are being truly seen and heard and understood and valued. That's happening less and less. So, I would ask everybody, like, do you want to be a part of the group who gives that to somebody else? We all know how good that feels to experience that. And if the answer is yes, again, regardless of whether it's about providing that for your team or providing it for a colleague or your own leader, it starts with being able to like be with that person in all of what they're experiencing, whether that's excitement and joy and some of those more like elevated emotions, or some of those more heavy or harder emotions that traditionally people kind of get squirmy around: anxiety or grief, sadness, loss, fear, worry, like all of those that can be less comfortable. But if you look at the workplace today, there's a lot of those emotions that are taking place. There's a lot of hard stuff at work. And there's a lot of hard stuff in life as well. And we aren't two separate people. So that hard stuff in work comes, or life rather, comes to work. And there's certainly a lot of joy and positivity in the world, but we're seeing, that mixture of emotions. And that's what we really want to help people with, is to be able to be with that whole spectrum of emotions. And to your point, like, not solve people's emotions. Their emotions don't need to be solved or figured out. They don't need you to make it all better and clean it up. But just really to provide that experience of being with them, validating, empathizing.
And taking that one step further, we could probably talk about this a bit more later on, but it is also just being in the suck with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy to celebrate joy and the more elevated feelings, as you mentioned, but sometimes when somebody's having a crap day, or something happened, whether in the workplace or in their personal life, and it sucked, it's okay to just say, that really sucks. Because sometimes we don't actually want oh, well, it happened for a reason, or just all of the different sayings that people have that are supposed to be compassionate. I think on the surface, they intend well. But really, I think from a human perspective, when you empathize, you're meeting an employee where they're at. And that means saying, yeah, that just really blows,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It makes so much sense. Like, if everybody listening thinks about something difficult that they've like recently experienced, you know, they probably didn't need somebody else to solve that for them. And if they had the experience of going to somebody to share that difficult thing, and that person like came back, to your point, well intended, but with a solution, or tidying it up or making it all better, it probably felt kind of like dismissive. And I know that that's not the intention that people have when they approach people's emotions in that way, but that is the experience. And so that's like what we're seeing happening in workplace conversations and interactions all the time, where people are kind of getting that dismissive or squashed feeling. And the opposite is to feel like connected, to feel part of that relationship, to feel validated. And that's why there's a direct connection between being able to like strengthen your emotional literacy, strengthen your ability to be with people and their emotions, and driving motivation, driving performance. Like, that's the ultimate reason why.
yeah. And there's the old adage of leave your problems at the door. I I feel like that's antiquated at this point.
Yeah.
Because again, you aren't two different people. So let's say you have a big fight at home, or I don't know, whatever it might be. And then you just mosey into work or your home office like I'm in now, and just like, okay, let me flip a switch real quick and pretend like there wasn't something that just happened. It's just not realistic. That's
No,
not how
wouldn't
we
it be
are.
nice?
Yeah. Yeah. It would be amazing, because I would like to flip off a switch when, I get in a fight with my husband or
I
something.
know. I wish that we worked that way as human beings. I was recently in conversation with somebody who said they had a previous leader who would say, like, leave your personal stuff in the trunk of your car. and then walk into the office like a fresh version. And I was like, well, that's nice. Like that's nice and not realistic. And no, people are carrying around stuff all the time. I recently went through something where my mom was having surgery and there was a lot of uncertainty around the outcome of that surgery. And I would have loved to be able to take that situation and put it in the trunk of my car or flip that switch off when it was the hours of work. But guess what? That's not how we are built as human beings. And so, absolutely, like that was a distraction for me. Those thoughts came up. They were, tugging on my attention. I probably wasn't my best, finest self. I maybe had a little less patience in those moments because I was exhausted just from thinking and thinking about this situation. And those are important things for people to know when you're talking about like workplace relationships, particularly leaders, so that there aren't these assumptions being made of like, well, Ashley's really checked out. She must not care about this project, or she didn't really speak much in that meeting. She probably has nothing to contribute. Like we make up stories all the time. So if people and leaders don't have that full understanding, it's not that they need to know every intricate detail of what's going on with my mom, but just that there's something tugging on my attention and there's a reason that I might not be showing up as my usual self. That's really helpful for them to know. And that's a short-term example, but there are chronic things that people have that they're carrying around with them, that if a leader or a colleague were to know about that, there's an opportunity for them to be able to provide additional support, to be more compassionate in those moments where the person might drop the ball, where they might not be showing up as their shining, brightest self. And that's, again, like that's the reason for this type of work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go back to something that you started to talk about a little bit, and you mentioned, our computers are in our pockets, so our cell phones and the virtual nature of our jobs. I think computers obviously have been around for a long time. COVID did a number, though, on what we realized as a workplace, what could be accomplished completely virtual. So there were some really cool things that came out of it. I remember when WebEx was not on camera, right? It was just like audio. And that was really like right before COVID. Like, yes, Teams was out, but like still people turned off their cameras. It wasn't as common to turn them on. And COVID, I think, propelled us into this situation where to find the connectedness with humans, we turned on our cameras, we saw each other's homes, we saw kids pop onto computer screens or pets and different things like that. So, the workplace has changed, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How else do you see things have changed in that regard?
Yeah, there are certainly benefits. I was just in a group conversation yesterday with like people all around the world, and that would have been a huge feat to pull off. A lot of resources to get all of those folks in the same room at the same time, and it was relatively easy to coordinate because of those tech advances and just sort of the expectations. So, I'm a big believer that nothing is all good or all bad. But often, like with the good, there do come some downsides. And certainly, one of the downsides to remote work or even really hybrid work has been of this disconnection. So, again, it's kind of ironic because we're more connected, but we're not more connected in certain ways. So, we've lost those opportunities. Like this might even seem foreign for some generations to the workforce that are newer and that have not experienced anything other than virtual, which is such a fun like conversation to have with different workforce generations. But like the lunchroom conversation where you would walk into the lunchroom and somebody would be sitting there and you would strike up conversation, and it wouldn't be about the tasks or the projects, or anything really work related. It would be about their kids' baseball team or this new movie that they saw or something along those lines. And it gave us the opportunity to know each other on a more personal level. Again, like there are boundaries. It doesn't mean that we were diving into their marital problems, but we got to see more of who they are, and we got to know more of who they are. We got to see more of ourselves in people. There's a great saying, like, it's hard to hate people up close. And I think that that's created a lot of the divisiveness, is like, we don't know people as well because we get on calls and we dive right into the agenda. And even when we were in person, you would get to the meeting room a little early and you would sit down and talk to the person to the right and talk to the person to the left and just have that little social time. Oh, what's that, salad you're eating? It's seemingly meaningless conversation because it's about very surface level topics, but all of those add up. It's like adding pennies to a bank, right? Like that conversation about the movie they saw is one penny and their kids' baseball is another penny. And next thing you know, you have this bank full of pennies, and that represents your relationship with that person. And that is really important. Again, it is important to people's feeling of connectedness to their work, to each other, which impacts their commitment to their work. It makes people feel more excited and alive to be a part of that workplace. And so it's not to say like we need to go back to that, because I think some people hear that and they're like, all right, let's get everybody back in the office. That's not the case at all. But we have to get more creative about how we can tap into that same way of building the pennies in the bank in different and new ways. And some of that requires some experimentation. And so you might try something new, like in your team meeting, and say, okay, for the first 10 minutes, we're going to put people into breakout groups, and here's a list of questions. Pick two that you want to talk about with each other. And you might find great success with that, and it might flop. What I would say is like, give it a couple iterations. Don't take, because people get a little weirded out about new things, especially when it's like a little edgy for them. But there are a lot of opportunities that we can take as people, as leaders, to create those moments, even when we are virtual or hybrid.
Yeah, and it requires effort, and it's hard work at times. So it just requires more of you, as you said, to be more creative in how we can create those moments of connectedness. And I love the bank analogy that you gave, because I think that is I think that was true prior, but it makes sense from a virtual standpoint when you're thinking about whose bank you're filling up and how you're engaging with others. And are you crediting or are you debiting from that bank, right? Are you depleting them, or how are you contributing to it? So I thought that was a good point. So how would you say, so you've mentioned tasks and projects, things like that. Of course, there's always room for encouragement and recognizing achievements, but I think what we're talking about here is a little bit different than that, especially when it comes to empathy and surfacing emotion. So what would you say is kind of different than how does it compare to the recognition in the way of achievements that's like work output based, as opposed to what we're talking about?
Yeah, recognition is hugely important. And, this is just one of those things that makes leadership in particular like challenging, because you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much to think about. Yes, there is. It's such a great opportunity for leaders to stretch themselves, because it's not just about getting done what needs to get done and hitting those metrics. It's also about tending to the people on your team, and we all have that opportunity as colleagues as well, not just as leaders. But where, these kinds of conversations come into place is around those more challenging topics. So when I think about the comment that, and I've received this comment more than one time from leaders, and almost the same language about the floodgates. Like, I don't want to open the floodgates.
Hmm.
And when you think about where that worry stems, it's mostly around like those heavier, harder emotions. I don't want to tap into and get curious about people's stress levels, about their own fears, their own worries, where they're feeling sad or where they're feeling lost. Like, you think about how much loss is happening. I know you had an episode on that specifically, but there's a lot of loss happening in the world and in the workplace. And I don't just mean death. I mean, like, there's just loss of the way things were and loss of positions and people moving and leaving organizations for various reasons. So those are typically the topics that people are shying away from, and that they're not getting curious about. So certainly there's room for improvement on both sides of the spectrum, like in the joyful celebration, recognition arena. We could do with some more of that as well, as we see. And in the heavier, harder emotions, where often the hesitancy to not ask about it is like, ooh, what's going to happen when I do ask? And again, it goes back to that. It's not our responsibility to clean that up. The person doesn't need you to clean it up. But they do need that space to know that it's allowed for them to feel that way, because sometimes there's this pressure, often I should say, there's this pressure to have everything be okay, have everything together, all your ducks in a row, achieving. We're on target, rah, rah. Like, there's a lot of pressure to kind of show up in that way in the workplace. And that's not realistic for people to be in that state of mind all the time. And so we need, especially people in organizations with influence and who sit in positions of power, we need to be the ones that demonstrate and articulate that it's okay to not always feel that way, that it's okay to be worried, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to have those fears, or have those heavier emotions. And that's what we want to see leaders be more equipped and more active in that space of asking about those. And you can have like a few kind of questions in your pocket that you might want to use with people. What we see a lot of is leaders that are like, oh yeah, I have these conversations with people. And when we dig in a little bit more, their version of having that conversation is like, how's everything going? Good. Okay. So now let's talk about that problem with such and such client and da 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 da. And it's sort of like, oh, I checked the box. I asked how things were going. But how would you respond to that question? Like, you would say, yeah, everything's fine. It doesn't exactly create an invitation to give more or to give the real picture. Like, it's edgy for the person who you're asking the question of to reveal a little bit of what they're actually feeling. So you got to ask a better question than that in order for them to feel like, okay, you actually care, and understand that my response might not be all rainbows and sunshine.
Yeah, and that's just the fact of life. It's not always going to be rainbows and sunshine. And so creating a safe place to do that, I like how you worded it, specifically inviting them to be able to bring those heavier emotions to the table, because it's just not always rainbows and sunshine, right? So it is, I would say, the responsibility of others to create safe places for people to show up in the capacity that they're able to. Um, And while they're not solving things, I like in your situation where you're talking about with your mom, there is opportunity to maybe load balance tasks for the day, or think about how somebody could help you with your work or a project, or maybe you have a call that you typically lead, and maybe somebody else can lead it, for you, just because it will run smoother, it will be better for everyone. And so there are those opportunities to show employees and others that you do care, and that it is safe for you to bring your full self to work.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of opportunity. And again, as a leader, it's a smart move to um, build your own skills to be able to have these conversations in a way that's genuine, but also again boundaried, because it's going to help you lead your team better. So if as a leader you're interested in achieving those results, like if you think about the situation that I just kind of talked about, if you have somebody who is really struggling, overwhelmed, super stressed, like on the brink of burnout, and they're showing up to your one-on-one and they're saying, yep, everything's fine, and like just sort of pushing down all of those really real emotions that they're feeling, that doesn't make those emotions go away. That just pushes them down. There comes a point where there's a breaking point, and those feelings of stress and overwhelm, if they're not tended to, they need to come out in some way, shape, or form. And I was recently speaking with an HR leader who has somebody on her team who is out for an undetermined amount of time because of stress and overwhelm that she didn't know the person was experiencing. And there was huge opportunity to kind of, again, use that word, invite in that stress and overwhelm into the conversation, so that the leader could have a better idea of, okay, how do I support this person so they don't get to that point? Because the fact is that like workplaces are stressful. There are aspects of work that are overwhelming. We're not going to eradicate that from work, but like, how do we help individuals to know their own limitations, know how to advocate for themselves, know how to share that, but they're not going to share it if they feel like doing so is going to potentially compromise their reputation, their opportunities to advance, et cetera, et cetera. So it has to come from that top down leadership position first. And what a great way to demonstrate that invitation, or to like make that invitation, and to ask a really powerful question in those times, like those one-on-ones or team meetings or things like that.
Yeah, and I can say firsthand, I am a shining example of what not to do when it comes to pushing all the emotions down, when it comes to work and work-related stress and overwhelm. And, mine, I'd say I was a bit beyond burnout. And had I even been in a place to have, I believe I had a really strong leader at the time. But I don't know that I felt like I could share what was really going on fully. And not to unburden myself, right? But just to be realistic with what I was managing well versus maybe not well. And I look back at the situation, and I bet that there is probably some wisdom from my leader that I could have gleaned had I been able to, had I felt it safer to kind of have the more difficult conversations around how I was really feeling. And not that, I wanted them to solve my problems at all, because that's not what I was looking for, but feeling seen and heard would have significantly changed the outcome, in my opinion, just by having somebody listen,
Yeah.
and empathize. So, you know, what does it look like for a manager or a leader to do this? Like, what are some questions or conversation starters could somebody utilize in conversation?
Yeah, yeah. I love that you bring up that example. And I think you're doing a lot through this podcast too, right? Of eliminating or reducing the stigma. And so people do feel more comfortable both on the leadership and the being led, the direct report side or the individual side of being able to have conversations around, mental health, mental well-being, emotional well-being, those sorts of things. It takes out all of us doing this work to really make a shift or in organizations. But some questions, I talked about earlier, the question of like, how are you doing? That's not a great question because it's not like really pointed, right? And so the person has an easy way out, and not to say that we want to corner people and pressure them into answering, but being a little bit more specific, like, what is your biggest challenge that you're working through this month? Or even more pointed around stress, like, what are the top 3 things that are stressing you out right now? And really asking some of those more pointed questions, which kind of direct the person as to where to look. How are you doing is so big and broad and vague. And it's just a question we get asked so frequently that it's not going to cause people to stop and really think. And I think also for leaders, in particular, like but this actually extends beyond just leaders, because we can all influence people no matter what our position is. And when we can be more open and honest about what we're experiencing, that's going to give people permission to be more open and honest in what they're experiencing. So for example, there continue to be a lot of layoffs happening. That's a great example to use because it's very real and raw. And, being able to say, like, I like these events that occur make me super sad. Like, I'm sad to see these colleagues leave the organization, or there's a lot of uncertainty. So just naming what you think might be in the environment. There's a lot of uncertainty. When these types of events happen, there's a lot of fear in the organization, or there's a lot of overwhelm that gets left behind, with people wondering who's going to pick up the load, and like, this is going to increase my workload. So just being able to name those emotions, which I think we talked about this in our first episode, we are very limited in even our understanding and our language around emotions. We tend to kind of be able to identify in ourselves just 3 emotions or emotional experiences, when there is a whole spectrum of emotions out there. So, skilling yourselves up to be able to know what those emotions are. Certainly don't assume that, everybody's feeling overwhelmed with the layoffs, but by naming it, you give permission to be able to have the conversation about emotions. And so you might say, I know that often when there are layoffs, there's a lot of fear around, am I next? Like, what else is going on for the team? What else are people feeling on the team? And inviting in that conversation. So these certainly aren't conversations that are taught in like regular business school curricula.
None at
So
all.
I get how it can be foreign to people, and people might be even listening to this and being like, you want me to ask what? So I always recommend, like, if you're going to step into new territory, especially as a leader, like, to let people know. So I know we don't traditionally start our team meetings off talking about our emotions, but I really want to start shifting that, because, I know that you all are carrying a lot. And you might not get like people chomping at the bit to like, oh, thank God you opened this up and I'm going to share everything. It might be a slow, gradual adoption, but stick with it. Let people know that you're trying this, that this matters to you, that you might be a little clunky. Stick with it, even if you don't get people right away, like super excited about it. Have some of those questions in your back pocket that are a little more pointed in the space of how their emotional well-being is doing. And yeah, reach out for support with people who you know that already do this really well and have some level of comfort or skill that they've built up to do this type of work or lead in this type of way.
Yeah, I love that. Leading by example too, because I think you're right. It does give somebody permission. Now, again, boundaries. Everything is within moderation, right? Because as a leader, you probably shouldn't be trauma dumping on your employees. That's
Right.
probably not a great way to lead by example. But there's nothing wrong with you saying, I'm just having an off day today, you guys, like, and that it humanizes you as a leader.
Mhm.
And I love that you called out too, even just being forthcoming and saying, I may be a little clunky at this because again, it humanizes you. And I think the intent is still there. And I think truly others can see that when you are being forthcoming about what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish and how you're doing in it all. Um, so I love that. Um, so we are having a lot of dialogue around how employers or workplaces can start to open up conversation about emotion. And the idea isn't to solve, I know we've said that a number of times, but there could be some things that you do uncover, and you might find yourself in uncharted territory a little bit. I think that's okay. But what would you say, like, I mean, is there a responsibility to like also be listening for things or looking for things when an employee may be showing signs of burnout or overwhelm to get them resources? Like, what's your take on that, Ashley?
Yeah, I think again, we're going to bore people with the word boundaries, but there are boundaries, of course. What I say to people when they have that kind of pushback is that people can come to you and open up to you in this way, even without you being the person who like initiates the conversation. So there's this worry of, oh, I'm going to ask the question and then the floodgates are going to open and then I'm not going to know what to do. But what would you do if that person just came to you with that information on their own accord? Like as a leader, there is again a responsibility to be able to know how to handle those conversations. And there's also a responsibility to be working in conjunction with your HR department and the policies that kind of govern your organization. Every leader should have a good understanding of what those parameters are, of what needs to be going to HR, what HR needs to be involved in, as far as their company's policy. And that's like regardless of whether we're talking about emotional literacy or conversations about people's well-being. But the question about whether leaders should be listening for things, absolutely. Like, would you be listening for concerns around a potential client that might be on the verge of leaving to one of your competitors? Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
Because it affects your bottom line for sure. And the same is true of your people, not only from the standpoint of your bottom line, but also it's the right thing to do. But for those that are less inclined to kind of attach themselves to that principle, it does affect your bottom line. So you should be keeping your eyes and ears open for some of those signs and signals that people might be overwhelmed or might be burnt out. And a lot of times people themselves don't know. We don't wake up and go, oh, I'm burned out today. It's usually this sort of up and down. You might have a good day or a good week, and then a bad day, bad week, bad month, good month. And it's not always this pervasive, all-encompassing experience. So things like if you're noticing somebody have a change in their kind of their attitude or their approach to work, if they are a little bit more short in their relationships with other people, if they are a little bit more scattered, it's that change. So certainly if they came onto the team as a scattered human being and that's how they've always kind of shown up, that's not anything to be alarmed about, that they are scattered in that meeting that you just had. That's sort of to be expected. But if you see a noticeable shift, and particularly if you see it in different situations or you're hearing it from other people, it's not an indicator to be labeling. So we don't want to encourage people to go up. Well, Erika was really short with people this week, so she's burned out. But it is an invitation to go to Erika and have that conversation and just say, hey, I'm noticing that in the last couple meetings I've been with you in, it just feels like there might be a little bit extra frustration. Name the behavior that you're seeing. So I'm noticing that the last few meetings we're in, you cut off so-and-so when they were presenting, and that's not typical. Usually you wait until people are done with their presentations before diving in. And I just wanted to see if there's anything, going on for you or whatnot. It might be nothing, Erika might be she didn't sleep well and it's really just nothing chronic to be worried about. But certainly being aware of what's usual for people. And when you're noticing kind of this ongoing unusual behavior or reaction, then that's an opportunity to get curious. I recently spoke with somebody who was talking about, she kind of had these contrasting experiences with her leadership over the years, where she had one boss who was so fantastic. She was she's absolutely the reason why I didn't get burned out in that really, really high pressure environment. And when she talked about what that leader did, she was kind of well, she sensed when something wasn't right. And she got curious and she acknowledged when things were really stressful. Stress ebbs and flows in organizations. Sometimes things are great, sometimes things suck. And so this leader for this person really was able to acknowledge in those times of suck and kind of was a little bit more attentive in those times, knowing that that was going to have an impact on her people.
Yeah, that's great. And, another thing I would say too, that comes to mind when you were talking about policies too, are, just because if you are more willing to be attentive and have these conversations where you're getting curious, there may be things that you are just not equipped to deal with. And that's okay, because as we've already said, we aren't trying to therapize the workforce, and you are not a specialist, most likely, in that arena. And so a lot of employers have an employee assistance program, or the EAP, right? And so knowing those types of levers that and the appropriate times to pull them to be able to guide the employee to is also super beneficial, because it takes the undue pressure of being a therapist and needing to have all the right answers and know what to say and all of that off the table when you have those resources already at your fingertips by educating yourself on what your company does have.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are much more likely to trust you as their leader who might be recommending that or offering that than like the random HR person they've never spoken to.
Yep.
And it's about a balance, right? So we started this conversation off talking about like shirking the responsibility or the opportunity as a leader to get curious and learn more and support people's well-being in this way, to HR. Like conversations about feelings belong with HR, but there's a balance. So it's about, to your point, being aware of the resources your company has and what is available, but also not just saying that's the end all and be all, and I'm not going to skill myself up in this way to be able to have these conversations with people because that's HR's responsibility. It's all of our collective humanistic responsibilities to be able to provide these experiences of being seen, heard, understood, valued for one another, again, like regardless of leadership position or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good place to tee things up too, in that by being willing to have the more difficult conversations or putting yourself in potentially an uncomfortable spot, it is beneficial to your bottom line. There are ways to motivate your employees and to increase productivity by tending to the human side of them. And so, what would you say would be like your last thought for kind of this topic as we wrap up?
Related to that productivity and motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always steer people back to their own lived experiences because there's this, you can't get away from the feeling that you have. And I would have people think about the times in their life where they have felt particularly motivated, where they have been particularly productive, and maybe even put those side by side in contrast with times when they haven't been, and look at what has been present in their life, and who has been present in their life, and what those people who have been present in their life have done that contributed to that motivation and to that productivity. And I would guarantee that the times when people have been productive and motivated have been when they have people in their lives who are seeing them, their whole selves, or when they have spaces and places and people where they can process through some of the difficult things. Again, we're not going to get to a point where workplaces are rainbows and sunshine all the time. There is always going to be stress. There's always going to be overwhelm. That's okay. But we need leaders who can make sure that drive for productivity, that drive for achievement, those realities around stress and overwhelm are balanced so that they aren't compromising people's well-being, and they aren't driving people into the ground, and people aren't left with workforces that are deflated and demotivated, or no workforces at all where people are leaving. Like this is a huge opportunity for leaders.
Yeah, I love that. I do think there is a lot of opportunity here for employers, leaders, people in positions of influence to just create a safe place. It leads to psychological safety, which is a whole nother conversation in and of itself. And, we are just about out of time. So I wanted to thank you again for talking about how to effectively navigate conversations around emotions as a leader. And I'm so happy that you came back to join the show.
I'm so happy to spend the time with you, Erika.
Thank you.